Rome called the Celts barbarians. Then Rome went to war against them, wearing their Celtic armor, in their Celtic helmets, swinging their Celtic swords. The chainmail that protected the Roman legionary, the lorica hamata, was a Celtic invention. The Romans knew it. Their own scholar, Varro, wrote that the iron ring shirt was Gaulish, and the Latin word for it stayed tangled up with the people who first forged it. The helmet on that legionary's head, the type we now call the Montefertino, is named after a Celtic grave. It was the standard helmet of Rome's armies for roughly 3 centuries. And the helmet that replaced it as Rome's signature look? Historians call it the Imperial Gallic, because many of the best examples seem to come from workshops in Gaul. And then there's the sword, the gladius, the most Roman weapon there is. It came from the Celts, not once, twice. Long before the famous version, Rome had already taken up the long iron blade of the Celtic world it kept fighting. And then it found something better. On the battlefields of Spain, Rome met the Celtiberians and the sword they carried, and admired it so much it renamed it the Gladius Hispaniensis, the Spanish sword, and carried it into nearly every war that followed. So picture Caesar's legions marching into Gaul. The men in those ranks were armored, helmeted, and armed in gear that traced straight back to the forges of the people they had come to conquer. Which raises a question. The word barbarian was never built to answer. If the Celts were so primitive, why was Rome fighting them with their own equipment? But the weapons are only the surface. The deeper irony is that Rome was not conquering an alien species. It was fighting a distant relative. Now, to be fair to Rome, everybody borrowed. This was the Iron Age. Goods, styles, and ideas moved along every trade route in Europe. The Greeks shaped enormous amounts of it. The Celts were borrowers too, not just lenders. Nobody in this story invented themselves from nothing. But here's the thing cultures do. They take, they absorb, they forget where it came from. And then, generations later, they call it their own. Rome did it with the sword. And Rome did it closer to home, too. The symbols of Roman power, the bundled rods of the fasces, the ivory chair a magistrate sat in to pass judgment, the whole theater of authority. Rome inherited a great deal of that from the Etruscans. The older civilization of Italy that Rome grew up beside and eventually absorbed. By the time Rome ruled the world, it wore those things as if they had always been Roman. Borrow, forget, claim. Hold on to that pattern, because by the end of this story, Rome is going to do it one last time. Not with a sword, not with a hammer, with something much bigger. So who were these people Rome called barbarians? Not strangers. That's the part the word hides. Rome and the Celts were distant relatives. Their languages, Latin and the Celtic tongues, grew from the same deep root, the great Indo-European family that spread across Europe in the ages before history was written down. Their older worlds shared echoes, sky gods, storm gods, warrior elites, sacred kingship, cattle wealth, oaths, feasts, and remembered names. The Romans called their sky father Jupiter. A Celtic thunderer like Tyrannus is not the same god, but he is an echo from the same ancient thunder. They were not the same people. They did not speak the same language or worship the same gods in the same way. And the Celts were never one empire. They were many peoples, Gauls, Celtiberians, Britons, Boii, and more, bound together by language, art, trade, and a shared warrior aristocratic culture, but rarely by a single command. Remember that. It is the thread Rome will pull. But Rome and the Celts were not aliens to each other either. They were two peoples who started near the same old world and then walked away from it down different roads. Rome took the road of the city: farm, household, law, written record, census, tax, road, camp, state. The Celts preserved more of the older Indo-European texture: cattle wealth, sacred kingship, warrior prestige, oath, feast, lineage, and remembered names. Same ancient root, opposite choices. And take one word seriously: kingly, because here is the sharpest thing these two peoples did with the same inheritance. They both descended from a world of sacred kings, rulers of holy blood, chosen and set apart. The Celts kept that world close. Bloodline and descent stayed near the heart of their power. Rome did the opposite. Rome threw its kings out. It made the very word for king, rex, into something close to a curse. To accuse a Roman of wanting to be king was to mark him as an enemy of the state. One day, that accusation would help put the knives into Caesar himself. Same root, opposite choice. One people guarded the sacred king, the other learned to kill him. By Caesar's time, those two roads could no longer share the same future. And that word, barbarian, was built to hide one fact above all. The Celtic road was not poorer than Rome's. In some things, it was richer, and the proof was buried in the ground they were standing on: salt and iron. Long before Rome cast disrespect at them, Celtic elites had learned to turn the earth itself into power. Salt came out of the mountains, and in the ancient world, salt was not seasoning, it was survival. It was how you preserved meat through the winter, how you fed a household, how you kept an army moving. One of the oldest salt mining centers in Europe sits in the Austrian Alps, at a place called Hallstatt, a name now given to an entire early phase of Celtic culture. The people there grew so wealthy on salt that they buried their dead with imported treasure. Iron came out of the ground too, and iron was tools, land, status, and war. The Celts mined it, smelted it, and forged it into some of the finest metalwork of the age. These were not poor men hiding in forests. Their elites set on salt, iron, cattle, trade routes, and weapons. Their wealth was real. Their craftsmanship was real. Their power was real. So Rome did not end up in Celtic gear by accident. Rome ended up in Celtic gear because some of it worked better, and because Rome was practical enough to take whatever worked no matter who made it first. So go back to that legionary marching into Gaul. The mail on his back, the helmet on his head, the sword on his hip. That was not the kit of a people who needed Rome to teach them everything. But do not mistake this for a story where the Celts were simply the greater people. Rome's road was formidable in its own way, just a different way. Rome took the old inheritance and forced it into the city. The household became a legal unit. The father became a legal authority. Land became status. Status became duty. Duty became military service. And military service became empire. Rome wrote things down, counted its men, counted its land, counted its taxes, built roads, built camps, turned conquered enemies into citizens. Its army was not just a war band, it was the state itself, marching. Rome did not erase the old world. Rome urbanized it. So what did the other road actually look like? Celtic power moved through people, not paperwork. Through kinship, oath, lineage, reputation, and personal followings. A chief was rich in cattle and famous for his deeds. Warriors fought for honor and for the man they had sworn themselves to. They gathered in great fortified settlements, Oppida, centers of trade, craft, and tribal power. And they had a learned class of their own, the Druids, not forest wizards, judges, teachers, keepers of law and memory. They educated the sons of the elite, settled disputes, and carried the lore of the people, all of it held in the mind and passed by voice, because that was how sacred knowledge was meant to live. This was a world of memory rather than archive, of voice rather than ink, of the sworn bond rather than the signed contract. it was not a lesser world. It preserved older forms of power that Rome had turned into offices, laws, records, and command. And it was about to meet a man who embodied the other road completely. Gaius Julius Caesar, aristocrat, general, politician, writer, and, this matters, Rome's chief priest, the Pontifex Maximus. It would be easy to make him the villain. Don't. That is not the truth, and it is not the better story. Caesar was ambitious, but in Rome, ambition was not a private hobby. For a man of his rank, it was bound up with duty, family name, public office, the honor of his ancestors, and the weight of being watched. The Romans had a word for it: dignitas, standing, worth that had to be earned in the open and defended. He may well have believed he was preserving Rome, not breaking it, securing a dangerous frontier, not destroying a people. And he did not have to hate the Celtic world to end its independence. He only had to be Roman enough to bring it under Roman order. Here is one of the strangest meetings in the whole story. When Caesar wrote about the Druids, and he did at length, in his commentary De Bello Gallico, he was not a modern skeptic mocking superstition. He was Rome's own chief priest, describing another people's sacred class, one keeper of holy order, writing down another. And remember what the Druids were, the people who guarded memory by refusing to write almost nothing down. They held the knowledge of their people in living minds. On purpose, Caesar wrote. That difference is the whole tragedy in miniature. And the Celtic world was not the intellectually empty place the word barbarian implied. Long after Caesar, in the Gaul that Rome now ruled, archaeologists would recover fragments of a bronze plaque we call the Coligny calendar, a sophisticated system for tracking months and years across a multi-year cycle. It comes from after the conquest, but it preserves a Gaulish way of ordering time, the work of people who counted carefully and had been doing so long before anyone wrote it onto bronze. And the same Caesar, Rome's chief priest, the man who wrote down the Druids, would go on to reform Rome's own broken calendar with the help of Greek astronomy and fix his city's sense of time. The priest who explained another people's sacred timekeeping became the man who repaired his own. So why did the Celts lose? Not because they were weak, not because they were stupid, because of how their world was built. The Celtic world was a brilliant, decentralized web of proud aristocrats, chiefs and kings competing for prestige, tribes with their own rivalries, local loyalties, and old scores. Brave, wealthy, dangerous, and hard to unite. Rome was the opposite. One state, one chain of command, records, logistics, alliances, and the ability to lose a battle and simply come back next year. Caesar understood this perfectly. He did not need every Gallic chief to be weak. He needed them divided. And so he did what Rome did best. He played Gaul's rivalries against themselves, befriending one tribe to crush another. But here is the part that complicates the easy picture of Rome the invader. Caesar did not force his way into a peaceful Gaul. He was invited into a Gaul already at war with itself. The Aedui, one of the most powerful Gallic peoples, were old friends of Rome. The Senate had formally named them brothers and kinsmen of the Roman people. When a rival faction brought Germanic war bands across the Rhine, and when a vast migration of the Helvetii rolled toward their lands, it was Gauls who came to Rome asking for help. And one of the men who came pleading for Rome's intervention was a Druid, Diviciacus, the only Druid history hands us by name, a guest in Cicero's own house. So the door Rome walked through, the Gauls had partly opened themselves. Gaul was divided down to its sacred class. One Druid stood with Rome. Others would die resisting it. When the Gauls finally saw where it was all heading, they nearly closed the trap. A young leader named Vercingetorix pulled the tribes together into a single great revolt, exactly the unity that might have stopped Rome a generation earlier. It came close. It came very close. Caesar even faced defeat at Gergovia, where Gallic walls and Gallic courage threw back Rome's legions. But it came too late, and now the pattern comes back, for the last time, in its heaviest form. Borrow, forget, claim. Rome took the Celtic sword and made it the symbol of Rome. Rome took the Etruscan rods and chair and called them Roman. And, after Gaul was conquered, Rome took one thing more: the story. The Celts kept their memory and voices, in Druids, in song, in the living minds that Caesar himself described. When the conquest was over, those voices fell silent, or were scattered, or were never written at all. But Caesar wrote. His account of the war is, to this day, one of the main sources for how we picture the Gauls and the Druids. The people who guarded memory by refusing to write it down are remembered, in large part, through the words of the man who conquered them. And make no mistake, the contempt ran both ways. The Celts did not see Rome as their better. To proud Gallic warriors wearing golden torques, and to the Druids who taught them, Rome could look grasping, faithless, a devourer of free peoples. They held Rome in scorn, just as surely as Rome held them. But here is the cruelty of it. We mostly know the Celts despised Rome because Romans wrote it down. Even their defiance reaches us in the conqueror's hand. Rome did not just defeat Gaul. Rome became the editor of how Gaul would be remembered. So, let's go back to where we started. Rome called the Celts barbarians, and then fought them in Celtic mail under Celtic helmets, with a sword that came from Celtic forges. It dismissed them as savages, and they were ancient kin, distant cousins out of the same deep past, who had simply walked a different road. It called their world empty, while that world mined salt and iron, forged fine metal, tracked the years in bronze, and held its law and memory in trained and careful minds. Rome did not conquer an alien wilderness. It conquered a relative. It took his sword. It took his land. And then it took the story. Borrow, forget, claim. That was never Rome's trick alone. It is what victory has always done to memory. Rome simply won so completely and wrote so much of it down that its version became the one that lasted. And 2,000 years later, we still see the Celts through Roman eyes. We still call them barbarians.